Imagine coming home to your childhood home, only to find out your parents sold it behind your back. That's exactly what happened to me. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lenny Harper, I'm 25, and I've always poured my soul into my art. Growing up in Ohio, our little house wasn't much to outsiders, but to me, it was everything. Gary and Merle, my parents, always promised it would stay in the family. Every corner, every worn step of the staircase held pieces of my life. My first bike parked by the porch, the smell of Merle's Sunday pies drifting through the kitchen, laughter bouncing off the walls during holiday. The backyard held the echoes of my childhood dog, Jasper, chasing sticks and collapsing under the sun, tongue lolling in pure joy. It was more than a home. It was a vault of memories, a sanctuary where the chaos of the world couldn't reach me. Every nook whispered stories of my growth, my triumphs, and even my heartbreak. Losing it wasn't just losing property. It was like someone had erased part of me, and the betrayal cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. A plain envelope arrived one gray morning, addressed in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a letter from strangers claiming ownership of the house I had grown up in. My hands shook as I read it. The sale had been finalized months ago, long before I even knew it was happening. Every word felt like a punch to my chest, confusion twisted into disbelief. I reread the letter, hoping it was a mistake. It wasn't. My home, the place that had shaped me, was gone, replaced by people whose names I didn't even know. I immediately called my parents. Gary's voice was flat, distant, almost bored. "It had to happen, Lenny. We needed the money," he said, as if that explained everything. Merle's tone was dismissive, brushing it off with a casual, "It's just business, honey. Don't make it personal." A wave of heartbreak crashed over me. The sanctuary of my childhood, the memories etched into every wall, had been erased without a thought to my feeling. The world I had trusted my parents to preserve was suddenly unfamiliar, leaving me stunned, betrayed, and painfully aware that the life I remembered was gone forever. I stormed into their small kitchen, the walls echoing with the sound of my own anger. My voice shook, though I tried to keep it steady. "How could you sell it without telling me? All those years gone just like that." Gary avoided my gaze, rubbing the back of his neck. "We were in a tight spot, Lenny. You know how things have been financially," he muttered. Merle nodded beside him, her expression a mix of guilt and defensiveness. "We did it for the family, sweetie. We thought it was the best choice." I felt my chest tighten. Their words weren't comfort, they were excuses. Every plan I had made, every hope I held of one day inheriting that home, had been disregarded. My memories, my sense of security, the milestones I had celebrated there, all treated like they didn't matter. As I listened to their justifications, a cold clarity settled over me. This wasn't just a loss. It was a betrayal I wouldn't forget. And somewhere in the depths of my hurt, a quiet determination sparked. If they thought they could erase me from what was mine, I would make sure they felt the weight of their choices. After the confrontation, I retreated to my tiny apartment, shutting the door on the world and letting the silence swallow me. Anger and grief twisted together, a tight knot I couldn't untangle. Every memory of the house replayed in my mind, blowing out candles in the living room as a child, crying over my first heartbreak on the old couch, the scent of pine and cinnamon during Christmas mornings. Each recollection stabbed at me, a reminder of what had been taken. I began to see the patterns I had ignored before. My parents hadn't just sold a building, they had made decisions over my head for years, treating me as if my opinions didn't matter, as if my feelings were secondary. The house was just one symbol of countless times they had dictated what was best, without consulting me. The betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss. It wasn't just about property, it was about trust, about being dismissed, about realizing that the people who were supposed to protect my world had chosen convenience over care. And as the nights grew longer and quieter, a simmering resolve started to form. I couldn't undo what they had done, but I could make sure they would never underestimate me again. Bile and resolve braided together inside me like barbed wire. I refused to let the hurt be the final chapter. Instead, I started digging, quietly, methodically, through ledgers, public filings, and dusty boxes of invoices tucked away in my parents' attic when I offered to help with spring cleaning. Names and numbers that had felt abstract began to line up, revealing a tangle of mismanaged loans, underreported rental proceeds, and contracts signed when one of them pretended not to notice the fine. Piece by piece the puzzle assembled itself. What first looked like unfortunate choices started to look like a pattern. Opaque transfers to shell entities, sudden mortgages on sentimental properties, and payments routed to accounts I couldn't trace. The more I traced, the more certain I became that what they'd called necessity had been a series of calculated moves that left me bereft. I kept my investigation discreet. I met with an accountant I trusted, an older woman who ran a neighborhood firm and smelled of coffee. She helped translate the dry columns into motive. Under her guidance, I ordered copies of deeds, payment histories, and corporate registrations. Each page tightened the knot in my throat, but also steeled my nerve. Retaliation didn't arrive as dramatics. It unfurled in low-key maneuvers. A whispered clarification to Aunt Marla when she asked about the family estate, a pointed question that nudged a neighbor to recall odd foot traffic at odd hours. I sowed seeds of doubt among relatives who'd always taken my parents' explanations at face value. I told carefully crafted stories, never lies, only fragments that encouraged people to ask more questions. Curiosity did the rest. At a community luncheon, I cornered one of Dad's old associates and, over coffee, steered the conversation toward the kinds of deals he'd brokered. He shifted, uncomfortable, and offered a memory that contradicted my parents' narrative. Word moved like weather. It changed mood and pressure in rooms where my family used to command respect. I also focused on reclaiming what I could. There were parcels and antiques tied up in paperwork. With the accountant's help, I flagged irregular transfers and filed inquiries that forced third parties to explain transactions. Officials responded faster when professional scrutiny arrived, and private guardians of records began to cough up documentation they'd hidden behind vague excuses. None of it felt like triumph. Each procedural victory came bundled with a hollow ache, proof that they'd prioritized ledgers over loyalty. Still, watching the facade of effortless control crack, hearing their friends murmur questions where only praise had existed before, warmed an ember of vindication. I didn't want to ruin them. I wanted recognition my life mattered when they made choices about. Slowly, the balance shifted. People who had once nodded along to their narratives now paused, perplexed. Secrets that had been folded into envelopes were pulled into daylight. The plan I'd assembled was neither elegant nor theatrical, but it worked. Discipline, documentation, and a steady hand that refused to be dismissed again ever. I found it by accident, a weathered lot just beyond the street where my childhood home had stood. The structure was falling apart, peeling paint, broken windows, a sagging roof. But something about it called to me. I signed the papers without hesitation, ignoring the doubts gnawing at the edges of my mind. This time, I was in control. Weeks turned into months as I transformed the space. I tore down walls, stripped old carpets, and repainted every surface with colors that felt alive. I installed easels and shelves for supplies, a corner for reading, and a wall where local kids could express themselves freely. My own artwork adorned the main room, a testament to the care and energy I poured in. Slowly, it became more than just a building. It was a hub for creativity, a sanctuary for others the way my childhood home had once been for me. Word spread. Neighbors began stopping by, curious about the restoration, impressed by the transformation. Children laughed and painted under my guidance. Parents lingered in conversation, and the place grew into a little pulse of the community. I knew my parents had to be watching. When I ran into Gary at the grocery store, his eyes widened at the mention of my project, and Merle's voice cracked slightly when she asked about the schedule of classes. They could feel it. Their daughter, once overlooked and dismissed, had taken what remained of her ties to the past and turned it into something thriving, something visible, something that couldn't be ignored. And for the first time in years, I smiled at the sting of my independence. I sent the invitation casually, almost as if it were routine. "Come see the new place," I said over the phone, keeping my tone light, masking the undercurrent of intent. They hesitated, but curiosity won. Gary and Merle agreed, unaware of the subtle trap I had set. When they arrived, I led them through the freshly painted rooms, pausing to show the little library nook, the art corner, and the mural that stretched across the main wall. I spoke about the children who came daily, about the workshops I ran, about the volunteers who pitched in. Every word was confident, measured, carrying the pride of someone who had rebuilt from scratch. I let their eyes roam over the space, noting their reactions. Gary stiffening at a corner I had renovated meticulously, Merle lingering on the mural of a phoenix rising from rubble. I smiled at their admiration, letting it linger just long enough to twist slightly into discomfort. Then, almost casually, I began to recount small moments from the past, phrasing them as observations. Funny how some people can make decisions for others without asking, isn't it? I mentioned the house in passing, the odd handling of family finances, and their occasional disregard for my opinions. I didn't accuse. I only hinted, letting their minds fill in the gaps. I watched them shift uneasily, exchanging glances that didn't meet mine. Their pride at my accomplishment was now tangled with unease, the faint shadow of guilt creeping into their expressions. It was a delicate dance, this quiet confrontation, and I was the one leading every step. By the time they left, I could tell the subtle victory had landed. They were unsettled, reminded that their choices had consequences beyond what they had imagined. Late one night, I stumbled across a folder buried in the back of my parents' filing cabinet, hidden beneath old tax returns and insurance papers. Inside were documents that no one had meant for me to see. Titles, loan agreements, and a maze of liens connecting nearly every property they owned. It wasn't just the childhood home. They had been quietly liquidating everything to cover a secret debt, one they never admitted aloud. The realization hit me with a strange mixture of rage and clarity. This wasn't mere carelessness or impulsive decisions. It was a pattern of deception, a web designed to keep me in the dark while they scrambled to fix a problem without accountability. I decided to act. I crafted an anonymous letter to their financial advisor, laying out the discrepancies and providing copies of the evidence I had uncovered. I didn't embellish or misrepresent, just the cold facts, enough to force scrutiny. Within days, calls started coming in, meetings were requested, and questions began to surface that my parents couldn't sidestep. I watched from a distance as Gary and Merle tried to justify themselves, their usual confidence evaporating under professional inquiry. The realization that their manipulations were now exposed left them rattled, defensive, and uncertain. For the first time, I felt the balance shift. I didn't need to yell, confront, or argue. My quiet persistence and careful strategy had placed them in a position they could not control. The power that had always belonged to them, the ability to decide and manipulate, was gone. They were forced to face the consequences of their choices, while I remained untouchable, the architect of a justice that was precise, measured, and devastatingly effective. I sat on the sunlit steps of my renovated property, letting the quiet of the afternoon settle over me. The whirlwind of betrayal, anger, and meticulous planning that had consumed months felt distant now, like a storm I had survived rather than one that still raged. I traced my fingers over the smooth railing, thinking about how far I had come, from helpless shock to careful strategy, from grief to quiet triumph. For a long time, I imagined that reclaiming the house of my childhood would be the end of the story. But standing here, surrounded by laughter and creativity, I realized I didn't need it anymore. The walls that had held my memories were gone, yes, but the essence of those moments, the lessons, the love, the resilience, was embedded in me. I had taken what mattered and transformed it into something alive, something that belonged entirely to me. My parents reached out, their voices tentative, carrying the weight of regret and apologies. I listened, measured, letting their words wash over me without softening my resolve. Forgiveness wasn't the goal. I needed respect, acknowledgement of boundaries, and distance from the people who had shown me that trust could be broken so easily. I finally understood that closure wasn't about erasing pain or undoing the past. It was about creating a life where I no longer depended on their decisions or approval. My legacy wasn't inherited. It was built, one brushstroke, one choice, and one steadfast step at a time. And in that quiet certainty, I felt a peace deeper than any home could have offered. The mornings at my new space had a rhythm of their own. Sunlight spilling through freshly cleaned windows, children's laughter echoing down the halls, and the scent of paint and clay mingling with the crisp air. What had started as a personal refuge had grown into a thriving hub, a testament to endurance and imagination. Neighbors stopped by not just out of curiosity, but with admiration, drawn to the energy I had cultivated. It felt as if the walls themselves hummed with the pride of creation, a silent acknowledgement of everything I had endured and overcome. One afternoon, I walked through the streets of my old neighborhood. The familiar curve of the sidewalks, the scattered leaves along the lawns, even the distant hum of traffic, all stirred fragments of the past. But instead of pain, I felt warmth. I remembered the small joys, the quiet moments of wonder, without the weight of anger pressing down. The past was a chapter, and I had learned to carry it with grace rather than grief. Standing there, I realized the truth I had been shaping all along. Loss does not define us, and what is taken away can be transformed into something even more meaningful. I smiled, letting the memories wash over me without tethering me to sorrow. Sometimes the house you lose isn't the loss. It's the lesson that teaches you to build your own legacy. Hey besties, thanks for staying with me through this intense journey. Losing my childhood home felt like the world crumbling, but turning that pain into a thriving space for local kids taught me resilience and self-worth. Revisiting old streets, I smiled at memories without regret. Sometimes, what's taken from us isn't the end. It's the spark that helps us build our own legacy. Like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.